Being very entitled and controlling, narcissists have no difficulty stepping all over your personal boundaries. So that's why I put together an extensive video class called This Is Me. It has 25 videos, written documents, guided questions. I'm going to teach you how to have healthy boundaries. There's a link below, and I hope you'll find it to be quite therapeutic. In an ideal world, any kind of interaction you have with other individuals, and certainly the building up of relationships, is going to be based on free choice. That's such an essential ingredient for a life of purpose and meaning. And when you have free choice in the way that you engage with others, usually you find that there are plenty of positive reasons that would draw you into that engagement with others to begin with. For example, in your best relationships, there's mutual regard, or differences are allowed and even respected. Affirmation and encouragement is present. There can be a lack of judgmentalism. There can be just common courtesy that's a part of those relationships. You have a sense of reciprocity. I'm tuned into you and you're tuned into me. There's a true interest that you share with one another. Trust is just a natural ingredient. In other words, relationships that have those kind of ingredients are those that you would just say, yes, I freely choose to do, to engage with that and to follow through on those kind of interactions. Now, when you're dealing with narcissistic individuals, there's a low likelihood that those people are going to engender those kinds of characteristics. What if the people that are in front of you, that are in your life, are the antithesis of what I just described? You know, narcissists are highly controlling, they're overbearing, they can put guilt trips all over you, they're insensitive, and they have an attitude of condescension, all sorts of characteristics that are not exactly endearing or something that you look forward to. And then compounding all of that, what if those same people are fixtures in your life? In other words, these are people that you are going to bump into, like it or not, that person at work or that person in the social realm or inside your family. You just can't completely get around it. You wouldn't freely choose to be with those individuals, but there they are. When you have a situation with very difficult and unlikable and sabotaging individuals, there are two elements or two factors that you're going to have to come to terms with. One is the factor of obligation. The other is the factor of dread. How many times have you felt like, well, I guess I'm obliged to go ahead and follow through with this, or to be with that person, or do what I have to do? Oh, but I so don't want to do it. There's that dread, like, what in the world am I getting myself into? Based on other experiences, I don't have a good feeling about this. The bottom line is, obligation is not a good motivating factor. It's not internal, and even if you talk yourself into doing the right thing or doing what's required of you to get to a better goal, there's still hardly any joy or pleasant feeling or enthusiasm that accompanies whatever it is you're doing. Should and supposed to and must and had better are your primary drivers. And then when you have those as your primary drivers, you're thinking, now, exactly why am I doing this? Obligation actually tends to have a strong defensive element. And by that I mean there's a sense that you just don't want to cause problems. And so, all right, I'll just do what I'm supposed to do. And hopefully that'll fend off any kind of difficulties that might arise if I didn't do it. And it's hardly ever connected to a sense of desire. And then when you have that sense of dread, that just compounds the obligation even more so. The part of the reason you have the dread is because there can be a fear there. Am I going to enter into something that's going to create a strong discomfort for me? Am I going to expose myself to psychological toxins or worse? Am I going to just walk away from that experience feeling disgust or demotivation or awkwardness? So when we look at this, there's this obligation and then the accompanying dread. There are certain things that you're going to have to come to terms with and ask about as you try to make your decision as to how you're going to go forward. And again, with narcissistic individuals, it's like, oh, here we go again. But as you think about what's required of you, you have to ask, well, how am I going to deal with the shame factor? Am I going to be judged if I don't go along with the obligation? And am I actually going to feel badly myself if I don't go along with my obligations? And then another thought or consideration that you have to come to terms with is, what about ancillary or tangential relationships? If I don't go with my obligation with this person over here, am I going to lose relations with people that I do find desirable? For example, well, let's say you have a sister that you don't enjoy her company, but you enjoy your nephews. And so I don't want to be with my sister, but I'm obliged there. But, and if I cut off my sister, I don't want to cut off my nephews, that kind of thing. And we all have some of those kind of things, and you have to take those kind of things into consideration. Sometimes you have to ask, well, if I do go along with my obligations and try to override my dread, am I setting myself up to be misinterpreted, like that person is going to think of me in positive terms that are really not very accurate at all, and they're going to take my presence as an endorsement of who they are? Sometimes you feel that way. And ultimately, you can be thinking, I want to get away from this, and is this something that I can do or I should do, or I just need to wait on the right timing? So I think we want to ask the question, what would happen if you chose to shun an obligation? Do you have that as a possibility? And there are multiple factors at play. For example, at work, if you don't do your obligations, will you lose your job or get a demotion or be in bad stead with the decision makers? Or, like I say, relations with others, will they suffer if you don't do your obligations? Might you lose money in this, or might you become the object of derision? And it's like, I don't want to have to deal with that. On the positive side, you might ask, well, if I follow through with my obligations with these undesirable people, might I somehow achieve some form of goodwill? Is there something positive that could come from that? Might I just say, well, this is just a matter of my character, and I'm going to go ahead and let my character rather than my preferences or desires guide my decisions? I mean, there are all sorts of things to have to consider. And one of the things that I have found through the years as I've talked with individuals who are trying to figure out how obliged they have to be towards narcissistic individuals who just generate a sense of dread, sometimes the one-size-fits-all kind of solution doesn't work. You have to individualize it in your own terms. So that having been said, there are certain key points that you want to take into account when you're with that difficult, negative kind of influence in your life that the narcissist represents. For example, at some level, I'm hoping that you can find that there's some positive motivation when you follow through on an obligation. So short term, you may find yourself feeling awkward or uncomfortable, but long term, there's something good that can come from this. You want to at least know that this is going somewhere in a good direction. And if not, then you have to ask, well, so what in the world am I doing here? Another thing for you to take into consideration when you're following through with obligations is keep in mind that feeling of dread is not something to ignore. It's there for a reason. How much credibility do you need to give to that? I mean, if you're just making it up because you're just a finicky person, that's one thing. But if the dread is there and it's strong and it's persistent and it's tied to some real negative situations that you know about, what's that dread trying to say to you? Might you be harmed if you continue to follow through with these hard obligations? For example, might you have a buildup on the inside of yourself of anger or anxiety and disgust and contempt? Might you be prone towards a lot of suppressive emotions to the point where you are damaged because of that? Might you be setting yourself up to be chronically oppressed? Those are some things you have to take under considerations. And if the repercussions of your obligations are too severe, I think you might want to ask, is it okay for me to say, I'm not going to do this anymore? Or maybe you can pull back and say, I may have a portion of obligation that I'll stay with, but I'm not going to just do all or nothing kinds of thinking where I have to do everything that the situation seemingly requires. No is still an option, and at some level, I'm going to be able to say no. This is a hard one, but I'm hoping that as you recognize sometimes there are some obligations that you just kind of have to do. We all have those. But then at the same time, that dread, I can't just completely ignore that. The bottom line is the dread is telling me there's something very unpleasant going on there. And if that's the case, my question to you is, are you willing, at least at some level, to make plans for a secondary way of dealing with this, so that you do have some of that feeling of free choice that's there? It may be that you'll do some, but not all. You'll avoid things, and then you'll go along with things based on what you think is best, so that it's not 100% locked in based on somebody else's determination. Can you still trust your intuition and know that even though you do have certain obligations, you're going to listen to what the dread is saying, and then try to find a sense of boundaries and a sense of balance in the way that you do that? It takes a lot of wisdom, and it also takes a lot of trust in yourself. Would you be willing to listen to your dread so that you don't go so far down that you completely lose yourself? That's going to be the key. Now, I do hope that videos such as this give you some good food for thought, and if you've not already hit that subscribe button, I would encourage you to do so. Gus is not too obliged to a whole lot of things. Gus and I will keep bringing you more videos as you do. If you have a need for therapy, and sometimes when you're with these situations, you need somebody to help, that can help you sift it out. I'm so pleased that I'm sponsored by the people at BetterHelp.com. There's a whole team of licensed professional therapists, and there's a link below that will take you to that. And so if you have a need for that, I would strongly encourage you to go in that direction. Also, I have my courses. They're very extensive, and they have multiple videos with written documents and guided questions. This Is Me is the biggest one that we have. It's about setting boundaries. We have Free to Be, Finding Yourself Despite the Controllers. We have Ready, Set, Connect, about having good connection skills. So avail yourself of that if that's necessary. We also have my webinars, our podcast. We have our website with many articles. We have my books, lots of resources. Obligation. Sometimes we just have those, but then dread, that's there for a reason. Listen to what's going on and make sure that you're not so locked into must and have to that there's zero free choice. And in doing so, I'm hoping you can still have a semblance that says, I still get to choose for myself what my priorities are going to be, because ultimately, I want to be a person of peace, and I can't be a person of peace if it's always being filtered through everybody else's requirements. Be you, trust your instincts.